is what's so interesting about the games like this, is because of, polygon count or frame rate or whatever, you can't have all the dead bodies being left.
Right.
But actually, if you played a game like this for an hour and then all of the dead bodies were left, you'd get a much clearer view, I think, of what a battlefield is actually like.
Welcome, everyone, to Archaeology Arcade, the online program of the Florida Public Archaeology Network. I'm one of two co-hosts. I'm Mike with the Florida Public Archaeology Network. I'm out of our coordinating center based out of Pensacola, Florida. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, Tristan, who's based in Tallahassee, Florida. Tristan, you ready to get into some combat, into multiplayer combat?
Yes, I'm sure this is going to be perfectly accurate and give us lots to talk about.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this game. And today's guest is an archaeologist, Stu Eve. He's with Waterloo Uncovered. He's actually our second international guest. And we had another employee of Waterloo Uncovered on last time. We had so much fun doing it. We thought we'd have Stu come back on. So Stu, thanks so much for joining us. And how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to it. It's a bit of a different format to what I'm normally used to, so it's going to be great.
Yeah, it is definitely different, but we always have fun with it. And that's kind of, why we like doing it so much, is mainly just because it's fun. Yeah. But let me read off this game really quick. It's called Holdfast, Nations at War. Here's the description based on Steam. It says, fight on multiple fronts in Holdfast, Nations at War, a multiplayer first and third person shooter set during the Great Napoleonic Era and World War I. Charge into battle with over 150 players per server. And this game was published and developed by Anvil Game Studios, and it was released back in March of 2020. Tristan, do you have any other things that you want to add about this game before we get started?
No, but I will note that we'll have chat turned off, and I'm going to be silencing everybody because this game is a little bit notorious for some of the shenanigans going on, and we don't want any distractions.
Yeah. That sounds good. So this is the first time we've done, I think, a first-person shooter like this, right? I don't think we've done one. I mean, we've played first-person shooters. I grew up on first-person shooters, but we have not featured one in Archaeology Arcade. So this is going to be a little bit different. And then it's the first time we've done with like lots of other players on the internet, right? Yes. I mean, so this is all kind of new, but that's part of the fun. So Stu, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Where are you from and how did you get into archaeology?
Yeah, so I'm based in the UK, and I work for a company called LP Archaeology, which is a UK-based commercial archaeology company. So we basically do, you guys in the States call it CRM. Mm-hmm. We do archaeology in advance of development. So I've been doing that for 20 odd years now, which seems completely insane. But alongside all of the boring commercial stuff, which is mainly spreadsheets and, telling people where to dig and helping property developers put up blocks of flats, I also like to do a lot of academic work as well. And a part of that is the Waterloo Uncovered project, whereas your listeners probably know from last time, we work with military veterans to excavate at the battlefield of Waterloo in Belgium, which has been an absolutely fantastic project to work on. We've been doing it since 2015, which was the 200th anniversary of the battle. It's a completely different type of archaeology that I'm used to working on, and it's been brilliant. In terms of getting into archaeology, I guess the sort of origin story is that I was really, really into history as a kid at school, but I got kind of bored of reading what other people had written.
Right. Yeah, I know how that goes.
So I thought, how do I actually find out about this stuff myself and pull it out of the ground? So I went and did archaeology at university, and then of course found out that basically most of what you do is read what other people have written about stuff that they've dug up, but occasionally you get to go out and do some cool stuff. So and it's brilliant. I mean, it's such a great career. It really really great. I mean, the pay is awful, but other than
right.
They pay you in pints, right?
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, except pints are too expensive in the UK now. So
that's too bad.
half
right.
pints, I think.
Right. And so you said that you've been doing archaeology 20 years, and it's, like you mentioned, you all call it commercial. We call it CRM, or cultural resource management, is what we call it in the United States. Mm-hmm. So can you kind of take us through the process of how you got involved with the Waterloo Uncovered, and how that's different than archaeology that you did before then? Yeah,
so the Waterloo project was originally set up by two ex-soldiers, ex-Coldstream Guards, who they're at university together. A guy called Mark Evans and a guy called Charlie Foynette. They both did archaeology at university, and it just happens that I also did archaeology with them. We were in the same year. So Mark had a terrible time in Afghanistan, came back with really bad PTSD, and eventually retired from the army. And as part of the sort of therapy, basically, for his PTSD, he went and did a project called Operation Nightingale, which was one of the first archaeology and veteran-led projects. So it's a bit bizarre, but basically what we do is we take the veterans. So this is either serving soldiers or veterans of various conflicts all the way back. We've had Falkland veterans and everything. You take them out on site, and basically you put everyone in a trench, and they all dig as a team. And then you sort of use the archaeology as a way of allowing them to talk through what's going on. It sounds like it's something that shouldn't really work, but it works really, really well. And this is what Mark found when he did his Operation Nightingale project. And then Charlie, the other one, who's still a serving soldier, he's a lieutenant colonel now. He was doing a tour for the Coldstream Guards of the battlefield of Waterloo in 2015, which was, as I said, the 200th anniversary. And he went out there, and he suddenly thought, wouldn't it be cool if we did an archaeological project out here? So I think basically what he did, or him and Mark did, was they looked through their sort of little black book of archaeologists who were still working that they knew. And I think I was probably the only one in there. So Mark gave me a call and said, hey, are you interested in coming out and digging with us?
Right.
So, yeah, and then there's lots of University College London graduates on the project, actually, because there was quite a lot of us at the time who stayed in touch. So it's a bit of a UCL mafia, to be honest, out there at the moment. But no, and that's it. And then we went from there, and we've been doing it ever since. Well, 2015 was the first year. Obviously, we didn't go out because of COVID.
Sure, yeah.
But we're going back out this summer.
That's amazing. Yeah. And so really it sounds like it's in essence of a form of, or maybe it is just therapy for what they went through. I know there's other programs out there that work with veterans. There's a group that does like horse riding. There's another one that does like scuba diving, and here we have archaeology, and it's very interesting. I'm wondering about, how that process actually works kind of on a psychological level, because these seem like they're all kind of activities where obviously there's a lot of thought and thinking that goes into archaeology, but I think sometimes in that process of what it sounds like is the actual process of the digging is where a lot of this takes place. And so I'm wondering, what has that been like for you to kind of see that process as an archaeologist? I mean, it's really it's really humbling, obviously, to start with, just to realize what these people have gone through, on behalf of the nation or whatever it is, however much you agree with, us going to war and all of that kind of stuff. The fact is that we are sent to war, and our soldiers, men and women, are sent to war. And certainly in the UK, often they're not looked after very well when they come back. And in fact, a lot of the veteran care in the UK is done by charities rather than by the government. There is government funding, and that
that's okay. But they tend to shift the sort of recovery and care off to a lot of veteran charities. So when the idea was first sort of mooted to me, I was like, well, come on, surely the government is going to sort them out, and what's the problem, basically. But then the first year when we went out and I actually spoke to them and realized what was going on and how often they're left behind and they're sort of, not properly looked after, not in all cases, obviously, but and I thought, archaeology, how is it going to work? We've got soldiers from the same regiments that fought at Waterloo, basically digging up soldiers from 200 years ago, and in my head that seems kind of mawkish and like it wouldn't work. But certainly in the British Army and I suspect in all armies, the link to your regiment is really huge, and that sort of history there is a massive thing about being part of a regiment. And so actually when one of the Coldstream Guards uncovered a Coldstream Guard button from one of the soldiers that died at Hougoumont in Waterloo 200 years ago, it was just this incredible moment to see them holding this piece of history, which is so important to them and to their regiment. And I think from then on, I was just like, okay, this is a thing that is going to work. The other thing is that it's people who serve in the army or the armed forces, they like being outside. They're used to working in teams. They're used to hierarchy. They're used to all of that kind of stuff. And archaeology is basically that. People working in teams. They're really good at digging holes.
Right.
Spend a lot of time digging trenches. So,
sometimes you have to slow them down, in my experience.
Yeah, it all sort of comes together in a really nice way. And what it does is it's a meditative process where you're looking at the soil or whatever, you're troweling away. You don't have to look at the people that you're in the trenches with or anything like that. But that's when the discussions happen. That's when people can suddenly open up and start talking about what happened. They're in a comfortable environment, but it's not sitting around in a therapy room where you kind of say, okay, now tell me about your PTSD. It all just comes out in kind of normal conversation. And that has been really humbling, but also very surprising to me as well. Or at least it didn't really occur to me that's how that would happen. But really a lot of that talking and discussion comes through either in the trenches or in the finds room when people are sorting out the finds and cleaning up stuff, because it's just natural conversation and they're in a place that they know it's okay to talk about that stuff. So that is really how it works. And, as an archaeologist, that's great because that's our profession and we're enabling this sort of recovery to happen. But on the other side of that, as an archaeologist, you're also excavating a battlefield with a bunch of people who know how to do war. And I've never been in a battle before. I've never been, shot at or anything like that. Certainly some of the places that we've been excavating at Waterloo, like Hougoumont, for instance, which is a farmstead that was held on, there was 2,000 Allied soldiers in there or something against 18,000 French soldiers, and they held on to it all day.
Wow.
And that is just like one of the forts in Afghanistan or one of the bases or whatever, they're sitting in there, they're getting all of this stuff thrown at them. And so it's very interesting to get their perspective on actually what it's like to be in a siege and to be shot at, and what that means for the soldiers 200 years ago who were there fighting. And that's a perspective that I could never bring to the archaeology. So that's super powerful as well.
Yeah, I imagine so. I mean, that's one of the, I think, strengths of any kind of community archaeology is when you bring in these stakeholders who have, who don't necessarily have the anthropological or archaeological training, can maybe see things that archaeologists or historians can't, just because of that lived experience. So yeah, I imagine that must be a really, powerful moments that take place out when you're in the field. Now you said you all are going back out there this summer. What areas are you going to focus on? I see you got some artillery right there. Just
I mean, it's really interesting having this discussion.
Right. It is.
Going on.
Right. It is.
Hang on a second. This is surely not what it was like. Everyone running around individually and
right. Yeah. That was going to be my other question. Is based on the work that you've done, at least in terms of, and I imagine you said you worked have you worked at other battlefields as well, or just mainly Waterloo?
Yeah, I was out in the Falklands earlier in the year, which maybe we can talk about a bit later. But otherwise, I'm not a battlefield or a conflict archaeologist at all, really. My co-director, Professor Tony Pollard up at Glasgow, he's a professor of conflict archaeology, so he's really the one who brings the kind of battlefield knowledge. I tend to bring the more practical, here's how you excavate trenches and do the logistics of getting archaeologists there and doing their work, basically.
Which is just as important. It's very important stuff.
Sure, yeah, it's not quite as sexy, but when it gets the job done.
But where are y'all focusing at this? You said that this summer you're focusing on a particular area.
So when we were out last, which was a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, we were excavating on a number of different bits. One of the main ones was a farm called Mont Saint-Jean, which, for those of you who know the battlefield, was one of the, it was like a sort of reverse position of the Allied army. But basically it was the field hospital for the Allies. So when people were getting shot up and stuff, they just got brought back behind the main Allied lines and were taken to this particular farm. And as we were excavating there a couple of years ago, we did quite a few trenches and didn't find anything. And then, as is always the way, in the last trench, we came up with some human remains, some leg bones and that kind of thing. Now, one of the things that we've been trying to avoid on the battlefield is sort of searching out mass graves and stuff, because it's just not really what we're there for. I mean, it's very interesting to know how all of that happened, but at the same time, it's it's a bit sort of touristic, weirdly, in a kind of weird way. So we weren't really looking for these graves, and it turns out that actually they weren't graves. They were sort of, well, they call them limb pits. So in the doctors in those days basically just hacked off arms and legs, and there's lots of amputations and stuff going on in order to save the rest of the person. And because there's so much of that going on, they would just throw it in a cart or whatever, and then they would get dumped in a pit. And in this case, we found a roadside ditch which was filled up with amputated limbs, basically, which is really fascinating, actually, to think of bits of the human body just being kind of rubbish.
Right. Yeah. And that aspect of warfare too, you often think of warfare as being what we're seeing right now, right? Just kind of running around firing. But then there's all the other stuff that's happening on the periphery, like, amputations, or like trying to save lives, or even after the battle, right? Cleaning up this, what happened, essentially, for people to continue to live there.
And that is something which is really amazing about Waterloo specifically, is that there haven't been any mass graves discovered. In fact, there's been very few human remains discovered, which is completely insane when you think how many people were killed there. But the battlefield's quite untouched. It was just sort of ploughed and is now just being farmed. So there hasn't been very much archaeological excavation going on. So this year we're going back to Mont Saint-Jean to carry on excavating that roadside ditch, to try and kind of just expand it, basically, and see how much is there, because we only got a sort of small look at it last time we were out. And then we're also going to a place called Plancenoir, which is on the south of the battlefield. Now, Waterloo is really interesting because you think of it as, Napoleon versus Wellington. But there was also a third army there, the Prussians, under General Blücher, who they didn't arrive until, sort of 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And they all arrived at this place called Plancenoir, which was held by the French. And essentially they came in and there was a huge, huge battle there, running backwards and forwards. And this is completely different from the rest of the battlefield because it's a small village or town. So it was all hand-to-hand street fighting. The rest of the stuff was a bit like you're showing here, except not in the desert. But it was kind of, lots of people firing over long distances at each other with cannons and muskets. But in the Plancenoir fighting was properly hand-to-hand bayonets and punching, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And no one has really looked down there before. So this is going to be quite an interesting extension of what we've been doing. We're going to do metal detector survey, and we've got a lot of geophysics that we're going to be doing out there as well, just to see whether there's anything there and what the remains are like. So that's really exciting. We're going to go and do something a bit new there. And then we are also following up on some more geophysical work, which has been done and is being done. There's some interesting anomalies that have come up that we're going to go and investigate in various fields.
That sounds amazing. And you mentioned this metal detecting survey and the geophysical work. Can you take us through the process of for people who don't know, like what's involved in a metal detecting survey? I mean, is it just, sure. And how is it different from people just, kind of going out with a metal detector on the beach?
Yeah, well, I mean, right. Okay. This is an interesting one. So metal detecting is always kind of controversial with archaeology because, as you say, a lot of people now have metal detectors and it's a fun and interesting hobby that people can just do. And as long as you've got permission from the landowner, you can go out in the field and metal detect on your own. But when we kind of deploy this in an archaeological investigation, we have to make it a little bit more systematic. One of the things that often happens when people are metal detecting is that they'll kind of just walk about and it's not necessarily systematic, so you don't exactly know what has and hasn't been metal detected in a field, and often you'll just follow the beats basically. But when we do it, especially when we do it at Waterloo, we have to set out transects on a field. So that's kind of lanes that the metal detectorists walk down, like a grid that we lay out over each field, and then we put one metal detectorist in each of the lanes on the grid, and then they have to kind of walk in a straight line and just detect that area, just so that we know exactly where everybody's been, and also it means that we can accurately record where the targets are, but also where the artifacts are that they've recovered. And that's been super important for us. So we record everything using a GPS, a global positioning system piece of survey kit. So everything is recorded to within, a centimeter, basically. And on a big battlefield, that's important because, for instance, if you find a bunch of musket balls, which we find a lot of musket balls.
Yeah,
and we're seeing Tristan's firing quite a few of them here.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you're missing
them all over the battlefield.
He's shooting the ground, basically.
At least I can hit something.
That's right.
You can, if you find all of these musket balls, there's two different sizes in terms of calibers. So the French have slightly smaller balls than the British. No sniggers, please. So you can tell whether it's a French musket ball or a Allied musket ball, which is already interesting. And then also you can tell from the musket ball, for instance, if it's hit something, then because they're just made of lead, they'll be a little bit squashed, or there'll be some kind of impact scarring on them. So you can that shows you that they've been kind of fired in anger and have hit something. Now we've recovered, I don't know how many, like thousands of these things, and we can now accurately map them all over the battlefield, and that can give you a really good idea of the ebb and flow of who was firing where and when, and what nationalities were in this particular area and everything. Wow. So with the metal detecting, it's so important that it's controlled in a systematic way, so we can use that data later. Otherwise, all you do is you've got a kind of pocket full of musket balls from this field, and that's not fantastically helpful.
Right.
Yeah, I guess, we knew they fired musket balls, right? We already knew that. But
it certainly did, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, but I mean, that brings up an interesting point, based on these, the metal detecting survey that you all have done, and because you've done it in a systematic way, has that shown you something different from what's kind of been in the historical record in terms of how battles have played out? I mean, what we're seeing right now, I imagine, when I think of Napoleonic War battlefield sites, what we're seeing right now in this game is Tristan just kind of running around, ducking cover, breaking off from the group. I'm thinking like lines of, thousands of men moving forward and firing in unison. Is that how it actually played out? Or
it is. I mean, So the Napoleonic era armies are very much everyone walking a straight line, slowly towards each other, which again seems mad, right? And they're all in, the Allies are in bright red coats and the French are in bright blue coats, and you can the concept of camouflage or like you say, duck and cover and all of that kind of stuff, it wasn't really around. I mean, it was starting to come in with the skirmishers and the 95th Rifles who wore green. If you've read any of the Sharp novels, that's that kind of thing where they're getting a little more sort of, okay, we can hide in the trees and we can be slightly camouflaged. But in the main, you've got 70,000 men on each side just walking towards each other, firing guns. And the whole point of this type of warfare is that it's the mass volley firing, everyone standing in a line, all firing at the same time, because these muskets are incredibly inaccurate, as you've probably seen on here.
Right, here we go. It's missing. That's why he's missing so much. It's because it's the musket's fault.
It's not me. It's not me.
That's exactly right. But actually, that is reasonably accurate. I mean, these things, obviously, if you're up close, you can hit something, but a lot of them were very inaccurate. But if you've got, a group of 500 people firing muskets all at the same time, then that's a hail of lead that is actually going to do some damage. So that's why they're moving forwards in these big groups. And we've had some really, back to your question, in terms of what can we find from these musket ball clusters and how does that change what we know? We're never going to show that Napoleon won the Battle of Waterloo, right? That's just never going to happen because he didn't. But there are certain skirmishes and areas where all we have are the personal recollections of the people who were there. And as we know, if you write a story about something, you write it so that it makes you look good or whatever, or you write it 3 years after the event, or you write it 50 years after the event, or whatever it is. So these kind of historical records are inherently biased, obviously, in terms of, classic kind of historiography stuff. Whereas theoretically, archaeology can bring a bit more objectivity to that. Now, I don't really sign up to the fact that archaeology is objective particularly, but equally we can use it to either support or disprove some of these original recollections. So a good example of that was at Hougoumont Farm, which was on the Wellington's right flank at Waterloo. So again, it's another one of these big farm complexes. There's 3 or 4 of them across the battlefield, which are used as sort of fortresses, I guess. And the battle there was supposed to, at the start of the battle, Napoleon said to his brother Jerome, he was like, go and attack that farm on Wellington's flank, and that will distract him and act as a diversion, which means he'll move a bunch of his troops over there to defend the farm, and then we can shoot up the middle with all of our infantry and everything will be fine. But Wellington didn't basically commit a load of troops to defend Hougoumont. He committed a few, but not as many as Napoleon was hoping. And Jerome, Napoleon's brother, was attempting to kind of make a real name for himself. So he just kept on attacking Hougoumont over and over and over again all day. I can't remember quite how many troops it was. It's like 18,000 versus 2,000 or something like that, like huge amounts. And they never actually captured it. But there's an area in front of Hougoumont. So it's a walled farm. And then there's a little area which has been called the killing ground. You can probably tell why. And then there's a hedge, and then there's a woodland. So the French were coming through this woodland. They come up to this hedge, then they have to break through this hedge, and then they have to run across this, I don't know, it's about 4 or 5 meters, it's not very far, to open area to get to the wall. And then they have to climb over the wall, and then finally they can get into the fort, right? But of course, the British or the Allied soldiers were lining this wall and shooting them as they were running across this thing called the killing ground. Now, we excavated trenches along the whole of that killing ground area, and we picked up, hundreds and hundreds of musket balls, and then plot them all on the map. And it's super interesting to see, as one would expect, all of the Allied musket balls are on the hedge side and all of the French musket balls are on the wall side, but there's definitely parts of that musket ball scatter where there's more French balls in certain areas or whatever, which suggests those were holes in the hedge where the French were funneling through. And then there's also a whole load on one corner of the wall. And then there's a whole load inside the garden, inside the wall. Now, there are a couple of stories about the French getting inside Hougoumont. There's a very famous one to do with the North Gate, and there's a whole thing about a small drummer boy and all of this kind of stuff, kind of myth around this thing. But there's no evidence so far of the French actually having got inside the garden at the back of Hougoumont. But we found a whole bunch of French musket balls within the garden. And originally we thought, they're just musket balls which have been sort of fired over the top, and then the parabola of them has made them kind of land in the garden. But actually they've all hit stuff, they've all been impacted. So it suggests that the French did actually at least get on the top of the wall and fire into the garden, if not all the way in. So it's a very, very small part of a very, very large battlefield. But the archaeology there is definitely at odds with what the historical stories are telling us. So it's those tiny little kind of vignettes that we can get at with archaeology.
Right. Yeah. And one thing I'm curious about is, talking about these kind of firsthand accounts. Are you all finding that, are you looking just at the British firsthand accounts or the French as well? I mean,
we're looking at all of them. And it's an international team as well, which has been super important. So we've got German veterans and we've got Dutch veterans. We have some French people on the team, although the French veterans haven't yet kind of engaged. But I think they will at some point, and we've been in conversation with them quite a lot. So that has been super important because, as you say, you can't just do it from the British perspective because that's ridiculous. So we've looked at all of the different accounts, and there's another reason why we will really want to do something in Plancenoit to look at Prussians versus French. That's something that hasn't really been looked at, certainly not in the British literature anyway. So it's being talked about, but no one's done any kind of serious work on the archaeology at least. So all these different perspectives are super important.
Are you finding that there's from one side that it's more accurate in terms of what you're finding archaeologically than another? Or are they just kind of all over the place? And what the reason why I ask is because I know in the United States, one of the first times like a systematic metal detecting survey was done on a battlefield site was at the Battle of Little Bighorn. And what they found was that the indigenous oral traditions about how the battle played out were actually more accurate than the official American military record of.
You do surprise me.
Yeah.
To be honest, we haven't really delved in that deep on that aspect of it, but I think it's something that we really should do. We've certainly found archaeology that supports some of the more famous recollections. There's one by a chap called Private Matthew Clay, who talks about in the morning they're in this particular ditch feature behind Hougoumont, and it had been raining the night before, and so all of their muskets are all wet. So they fill up their they clean out their muskets, and then they fire them all into the bank of this particular ditch in order to sort of clean them out and make sure that they're working properly. And then we found a bunch of Allied musket balls in the bank of the ditch, which there's no reason that they would be there because there wasn't much fighting going on in that particular place. So there's, it's tangible evidence that yes, the soldiers were in there, testing out their muskets, which is really, really cool. Like it's a real jump across that gulf of 200 years, and you can kind of, it just gets you closer, basically. But in terms of which account is more accurate, they're all just all over the place. I mean, you can see here, right? You're running around on a tiny bit of this battlefield, and the other players are all around everywhere else, and their battle's very different from your battle, and you don't know what's going on, and they don't know what's going on where you are, and it's battlefield recollections are just, they're kind of insane.
That actually would be really interesting, kind of from an archaeo gaming perspective, to with all these players, like you mentioned, they're all on different parts of the battlefield, and then maybe doing a study where after the simulated battle, each player kind of reflects on what happened, and then we have literally video of what actually happened and see how different that might actually be.
That is a really, really fantastic idea. Yeah. I would be super interested to have a look at that, because Wellington has this very famous quote which is used all the time. He says a battle is like a ball. So in this case, he means like a dancing ball, because there's people sitting at the side, there's people dancing over it, but you don't know what happens in the party for everyone, right? You kind of know a party happened, and you kind of know that everyone came and everyone left,
right?
And the alcohol doesn't help in those recollections either, right?
Exactly. And then you think about this as a battle, seeing your mates being shot or whatever, getting shot yourself, that doesn't help either, right? In terms of finding out what's going on and the fear. I mean, that's the other thing about archaeology, which is at Waterloo specifically, which has been amazing, that we found this musket ball, which had this very strange kind of damage to it. So it had a sort of hole in the top of it, and it's really weird. It doesn't really fit with anything that we've seen before. But Tony had seen this previously on a different battlefield, and basically it was. Well, you can see actually if you fire a shot and reload. Can you reload now?
Oh, sorry, I was going to stab a guy.
Don't stab the guy. Reload. You see how it? So he puts his ball in the top of the. Oh, sorry, you got killed. It always happens. Reloading is a terrible idea.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But so you put your ball in the top of the musket, and then you use your ramrod to push it down so that it's on the wadding, which then explodes and fires the ball. But here you go. That's good. So he's getting his kind of wadding out of his thing, and he's getting his little bit of gunpowder. He's putting that in, and then he's using his ramrod to put the ball on top of the gunpowder. Right now, if you do this on parade, it's all very easy. You kind of go, okay, I get this thing out of my ammo bag. I'll put it down the end of the barrel, and then I'll put my ball on top, or the ball's in a little paper sheet with the gunpowder. Bam, bam, bam. But if you're trying to do that under duress, when you're being fired at or whatever, what happens is you put it in and then you're like, oh God, and you're doing this thing with the ramrod super, super hard because you're crapping yourself basically.
Right.
And this musket ball that we found was basically crushed because the person who was putting it in the barrel overrammed it.
Oh,
wow.
So it's like this incredible tangible evidence of some soldier just being absolutely terrified and doing it wrong and trying to reload too quickly, and
right.
And that really just gets you so close to what it must have been like, and in a way that, you know, words do, but just being able to look at that ball, that was that is the archaeology of fear right there, and you don't get that kind of stuff very often. So
I've thought the same with dropped mini balls or dropped musket balls. Have you found those?
Yeah.
I noticed, I have been told anyway, that tends to be more of them in places where people are under strong duress, where they're under fire and such.
Yeah.
And
that's exactly right. In fact, we found a lot of those because you're scrabbling around and you're like, oh God, I can't do it. And exactly.
Just drops out. Yeah. Wow. I mean, we're talking about the different types. And I think in this game, you know, obviously this is a different battlefield. And I think are you Italy right now? I think that's what I think you picked Italy or something. But a lot of the, obviously the weaponry is going to be very similar to what they may have used at Waterloo. So some of the things that I took notes on seeing was I actually saw a drummer at one point. We actually saw a drummer. You mentioned the drummer boy. I saw you actually firing rockets. I didn't know that was a thing back then. It was actually firing rockets. And maybe, I don't know if this game is accurate or not. And then obviously we saw some field artillery. We've talked a lot about musket balls. Also, one thing that we've seen a lot of here in this game on each musket is the bayonet. Have you found at Waterloo these other types of battle instruments like bayonets and rocket pieces and how common are those?
Rockets? No, I think there was one rocket. I don't know whether they were actually on the field though. I can't quite remember. So there are these things called Congreve rockets. It's a British guy called Congreve, I guess. Maybe he's French, I don't know. But anyway, the British had these rocket units. They were completely and totally useless.
That's what it looked like. It looked like a bottle rocket.
Right.
You ever shot one of those?
But it's more kind of shock and awe type stuff, I think. Like, what is this crazy thing that they're firing at me? I have no idea what that is. People haven't seen it before. So I think it was more of that. But cannonballs, we found lots of, because there's I think there must have been 400, 500 guns on the field. And these are big guns, right? You know, I mean, they're not kind of naval warfare guns, but they're firing big cannonballs. And this is always the problem with this massed infantry stuff. Obviously, they're completely vulnerable to cannonballs, right? Being fired straight into a load of people, because the cannonball just goes through the first line and then carries on, and then, you know, kill the first soldier, probably take the arm out of the one in the second line, and then probably take the leg out of the other one, and then it will bounce, and then it will hit the other guy and knock them out. You know, it's like they are absolutely horrific, horrific weapons. But so we found a whole bunch. We found some of those. We've also found howitzer shells. So they are hollow balls which are filled with gunpowder that you effectively put a fuse in. You light the fuse and then fire it, and hopefully you get it right so that it then explodes over the top of a bunch of infantry and fires shrapnel, you know, over a wide area. I don't know whether there are howitzers in this game. I'm sure there are. Also horrendous. We found grape shot. So grape shot is basically a bunch of, they're not quite as small as musket balls, but they're slightly larger than musket balls. They look like a bunch of grapes that they're in a net or a bag or something. You put them into a cannon. Oh, there you go. That's it. You put them into a cannon, fire them at short range, and it's effectively like a big shotgun. So they just spread out and decimate anything. I mean, it's all very kind of, I don't know, visceral compared to modern warfare, right? Where you're kind of like, okay, I mean, obviously modern warfare is horrendous as well, but because there's a lack of accuracy of this stuff,
it's just indiscriminate, right? I mean, it's just like wherever it lands. And one thing that kind of is fascinating to me, when you think about battles that took place during the Napoleonic Wars, you're thinking like, at least I used to think, just giant fields, like empty fields, and like no one's living there. But actually, no, this was taking place in like people's backyards, right? I mean, this is like where people were living at.
Yeah, and when you were talking about the cleanup there, I mean, the cleanup of Waterloo, it was awful. We know it was awful because there's people who've written about it. They came after the battle and they're like, okay, there's great big piles of bodies and horses. I mean, the number of horses that died, just you never think about the horses. There's just thousands of horses that were.
Have you guys found like horse remains?
We have found in Mont Saint Jean where we found the limb pit. There is also some horse remains in there, but other than that, we haven't really found any horses anywhere else at the moment. But yeah, these, the guy who owned Hougoumont Farm, the farmer who was in there, for instance, one day he was just sitting in his farm, and then the next day his whole farm's filled up with soldiers. They've eaten all of his stuff. And then the French fire a howitzer, it explodes on a hay loft, which then just basically burns the whole farm down.
Wow.
And then the next day everyone just goes away.
Right.
Like,
yeah, it's like, but do they get compensated? Like, can they,
They can apply for compensation.
They can. Okay. I'm sure there's a lot of paperwork involved in that.
Yeah. And also, I don't know what the paperwork was like, but also there is payment for people cleaning up as well.
Wow.
So the peasants or whatever get payment for cleaning up. But, to bring it completely up to date, you just have to look at some of the cities in Ukraine that are just being blown to crap now.
Right.
And the people are going to go back to their houses, and their houses aren't going to be there.
Right.
So, are they going to get compensated from Russia? I doubt it.
Right.
So the kind of the aftermath of war has been the same for centuries. You can talk about medieval war or you can talk about modern war. Basically, someone comes along, an army comes along, they eat all your stuff, they sleep in your bed, and then they leave. Mm-hmm. And then you've got to just deal with it. And so, the effect on the civilians is huge, as well as the effect on the soldiers themselves.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's often something that's lost, when we're reflecting back on, more recent times. I think people are a little bit more aware. Like, I think Ukraine is a great example of that. The tragedy and the human cost, and on an individual level, what that means for families. Not just losing your home or losing all your possessions, but literally having to leave everything behind, including family members in some cases. But I think when we look at battles that took place 200, 300 years ago, we're so far removed from it that, we're just thinking of the battle. We're not thinking about, how, here in this case, the game is focused on the battle itself. But,
right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously it's because it's a first person, third person shooter, and it's supposed to have a lot of action in it. But that other side to the years and years of cleanup and repair and families trying to find each other, or maybe never again, is something that is not often.
And the PTSD. We concentrate a lot on PTSD of military veterans,
mm-hmm.
and rightly so. But equally, the PTSD of the people that are affected by it as well. I mean, this is what's so interesting about the games like this, is because of polygon count or frame rate or whatever, you can't have all the dead bodies being left.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But actually, if you played a game like this for an hour and then all of the dead bodies were left, you'd get a much clearer view, I think, of what a battlefield is actually like. Certainly with the work that we were doing in this killing zone, the amount of soldiers that must have been killed in that very, very small area. At some point, the French are walking over their mates and using them as a way to get up on the wall, that's just what's happening. And the thought of having to do that yourself is just horrendous. And these games don't give you any idea of the fact that, I could actually use, my fallen comrades as a human bridge to get higher up a wall. Right. And even the thought of it's horrendous, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. But, definitely. I think it in a way it desensitizes people to the violence, but also it also sanitizes it a lot. I think that's a great point with, how horrific that must have actually been to be there and witness all of that. Here we can play this, go away, not think about it again. But for people who actually live through things like this, it stays with them forever. I mean, I'm a military brat. I grew up around military communities. I got friends who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're still dealing with it 20 years later. So I mean, I think it's great work that you're doing and providing an opportunity for them to be able to be involved, especially with links to the units that they actually serve with. But then I think that's such a great thing that they're able to contribute to archaeology, but also to get a vessel in a way to kind of talk about what happened and maybe provide a little bit of therapy along the way and understanding for you all. I think it's just fantastic work. It's been really interesting for me in that perspective, because, as you can probably tell, I think war is horrendous. And to be honest with you, I don't really like excavating battlefields. Sure, because I just find it, it's obviously distressing, but equally having to engage with it, and then also having people who aren't just in it for, isn't this interesting, I found a whatever type blah 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 musket thing that I don't know any of the military terminology really in terms of what bits of musket are which, but some people love it, right? And they're like, this is this particular badge of this particular thing, and get very excited about it. Whereas I don't really, I don't have enough room in my head to have the military equipment catalog. So there's a lot of stuff. I mean, that's all I do.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. And it's been very interesting to come to this project with the perspective of someone who isn't into war and then bring that perspective, but also be affected back, actually maybe I should be interested in war because of the effects that it's had on the soldiers, because of the effects it's had on the landscape and the people and history and all of that stuff. So that's been quite kind of transformative for me actually, which I hadn't expected when I first started working on the project.
Yeah. And then can you we've got just a couple more minutes left, but I did want to so you said you work for LP Archaeology. Where can people find more information about any of your work or any projects that you're involved with? Where's somewhere people can go?
Yeah, so our website is www.lparchaeology.com. That's our main website. But personally, the best place to find out about the stuff that I'm doing is on Twitter, I suspect, where I'm at Stu Eve, all one word.
Okay.
So I'll normally tweet stuff on there, or maybe links off to things from there. Yeah. So
and I'll put a link to both of those in the description of this video. This video will go up on our YouTube channel probably in the next couple of days. I'll put it up. So any of those links, I'll share those for sure. But if you can think of any other ones that we can share, I'll definitely put like Waterloo Uncovered. I know they got a YouTube channel. Sorry, Tristan, go ahead. You got something?
Send us stuff to share. Basically, we want to promote your programs.
Much appreciated. Yeah, I think that this is a really cool format. I'm really enjoying it.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, it's super nice to talk to you. And then I know we just have a couple more minutes. So I know you mentioned you've been doing stuff in the Falklands. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Maybe we can find a game to feature you on to talk more about that in more detail. But I'd like to at least hear a little bit about it.
Yeah. So the Falklands project, it's a joint project out of a chap called Tony Pollard, who's on Waterloo Uncovered, and Tim Clack, who's at Oxford University, and then also Waterloo Uncovered. So basically, we're doing a similar thing to what we've been doing at Waterloo, but on the Falklands conflict. Now, it's clearly a bit different because the Falklands happened 40 years ago, and the veterans that we've taken out to the Falklands a few weeks ago, they were actually veterans who fought in that particular battle. So it's a bit more, it's a bit closer, basically, than the Waterloo stuff. So yeah, the conflict itself, 40 years ago, as you may or may not know, the Argentinians have a claim, or they have a claim over the Falkland Islands, which they call Las Malvinas, and Britain has colonized it for many, many years. And basically, 40 years ago, the Argentinians invaded the Falkland Islands to sort of take it back, and then Margaret Thatcher sent a task force from Britain to kick them out, basically. So it's a very, very interesting conflict, depending on where you're coming from, on the British or the Argentinian side. But we've been out there surveying one of the battlefields, a battlefield called Mount Tumbledown, and basically just recording what's there. So there's lots and lots of different Argentinian bunkers and kind of dugouts and sangers, they're called, like defended areas, and sleeping places and stuff. And there's loads of stuff still out there, but it's all being kind of subsumed into the peat or being taken away by souvenir hunters and all that kind of stuff.
It's too bad.
So we went out there basically just recording what was there, having a look about, and but also taking these two veterans out who could then tell us exactly what happened on the night, because they were actually in that battle. And as I was saying right at the top of the show, the having someone who knows about how to fight war is really, really good. But then having someone who actually fought in that battle is also incredibly interesting, because their recollection of the battle was kind of a little bit different to what we found. And that's helped them as well, to sort of realize that certain things that they thought were happening didn't happen, or they happened in a slightly different way or whatever. So it's really helped them work through a lot of stuff that they're dealing with still 40 years later.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we're also recording the archaeology so that, it's preserved by record, at least, as it starts getting lost over the next, 20, 30 years or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like a fascinating project, and we'd love to have you on sometime in the future, maybe to talk more about that or any other thing you're working on. But we really appreciate you taking the time to come on this show. Like I said, absolutely. And then we do have a couple shows coming up. Henry Raymond Picard, we had him on last time from Waterloo Uncovered. He's going to come back on May 19th. What game are we playing with him, Tristan?
Valheim. We're doing Vikings this time.
It's Vikings. So favorite. Henry, his apparently that's his thing, is Vikings. So we're gonna get on the Viking train and see where it takes us. And then in June, hopefully early June, we're trying to set up another archaeology arcade with for the first time will be Dr. Bill White from UC Berkeley. He recommended the game called Dawn of Man. So we're going to try to set that up sometime early June. Just I don't even know if I told you about that yet. So
I don't think you did. You sent me a random link and I didn't know what it was about.
Okay, that's what it was about. So we'll figure out a time for that. But for anybody that's on Twitch right now, you can view all the episodes of Archaeology Arcade by going to our YouTube channel. It's just Florida Public Archaeology Network. You can go to videos under Archaeology Arcade. You'll find all the episodes on there, including this one in a couple days. For anybody that goes to our YouTube channel, you can always comment, subscribe, like our stuff. If you've got a game that you think we should feature in this, just let us know. You can let us know on Twitch while we're live streaming, or you can just comment on one of our videos and say, hey, this game would be a great one. You guys should play it. And if you are an archaeologist anywhere in the world and you are interested in coming onto the show, we would love to have you. Just reach out to us. You can find our contact information. You can contact us through Twitch or through YouTube, or you can go to our website, fpan.us, and find Tristan and my contact information on there. But again, Stu, thanks so much. We really enjoyed it, and we'll see everybody next time.
Cheers.
Bye.